It is 10 o'clock. Just to remind you that we are being broadcast. In fact, Simon Tagg has reminded me that he'd be monitoring the meeting from downstairs and he will attend from his office when he's aware that we're at that agenda item. So welcome to the meeting of Corporate Review for the 25th of October. I'll start with apologies.
We've received apologies from Councillors Clements, Parry, Cabinet members Mark DeVille and Ian Parry.
That's Perry, is it? Kath Perry? Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
Any other apologies that members know of? Okay, we'll go to item 2. Are there any declarations of interest? Take that as a no. The minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of September 2022, pages 1 to 6. Are there any comments, alterations necessary? Okay, I'll sign those as a true record. Thank you. Item 4 is the Complaints Annual Report for Corporate Services. I know the author is Kate Bullivant, who's going to take us through it. Is it Kate? Okay, over to you, Kate.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Kate Bullivant. I'm the Complaints Manager for Stafford County Council, and I'm here today to present the Corporate Annual Report. The statutory annual reports for children's and adult social care have already been presented at the Safeguarding Overview Committee, so this is completely corporate. So the corporate complaints procedure is a formal procedure which is based on do it once, do it right. So if a complaint comes in, there is an expectation that the service area support us in providing a thorough evidence-based response to our complainants. Once the response goes out, there is the opportunity for the complainant to come back to us to say, you've not answered this part, that part, and therefore that's known as a stage 2 review. So we will provide a further response bearing in mind what they come back to us with. We do have the opportunity to say no, because we have to ensure that we put people through a process, but we make that process as straightforward and as easy as possible within timescale. After that, the complainant that can then proceed to the local government and social care ombudsman, who we work with to ensure that the complainant gets to the end of that process too. The complaints team not only deal with complaints, we also deal with duty matters. So we have a lot of information and a lot of comment and feedback that can't be addressed by the corporate complaints procedure. And you'll see within the report, we deal with duty issues, we deal with MP inquiries, and we also deal with public inquiries. Not everything is a complaint. So for example, a report of a pothole would be seen as a request for service. It wouldn't be seen as a complaint. So therefore, the number of complaints that come into the corporate procedure, as you will see, has reduced this year from 87 to 49. But as you can see, there is lots of lessons learned within the report that shows that we take complaints seriously. It is a very detailed report, and I'm not proposing to go through it step by step, bearing in mind the amount of detail in the report, but of course happy to take any questions about it.
Okay, I'll open that up for questions. Councillor Francis.
Morning, Kate. Nice to see you. I haven't seen you for years. How are you? Yeah, page 16. Number of complaints by team. Transport's 14. Why is that so high? Number one, highways maintenance, you just explained, we know what that is. But the bar chart at the bottom on the right, the green one, has got poor communication. If you recall, in Safe and Strong a few years ago, we highlighted that as a major problem, communication. And I don't think it's got any better, because I get complaints all the time. They can't get hold of the council, it's no good ringing in, the number doesn't work. Elderly people, I can't go on a website, I can't use it. The list goes on and on and on. How the hell are we going to improve that if we're in such a mess, trying to get communication into the building without explaining what's going on?
Thank you, Councillor Francis, and I'm very well, thank you. Hope you are too. I think communication throughout the council is highlighted at every point throughout the complaints procedure. We're a digital council, we're deemed as a digital council, and therefore a lot of our processes are digital. As you know, the complaints phones are always open. We do take calls, and as you also know, in respect of adult social care, Joe Coucher ensures that we find different ways for our elderly people to actually contact us. I know there is work ongoing in respect of ensuring there is someone at the end of a phone via transformation in a number of areas at the moment. So whilst I appreciate that you don't think it's been taken on board, it is taken on board, and we do try to move forward with that.
Well, I know as well as you, because you took me round it years and years ago, the team we used to have on communication, phoning, I know we've reduced it, I know why, and digital this and digital that's fantastic when it works. When you have a serious issue, particularly a vulnerable adult who needs to get to the council to get some help, and then they come to me and complain they can't get through, or they haven't got the right person, or they've been fobbed off, where do we go with that?
John Treadwell or Alan Castle White?
Yeah, I think
John Treadwell.
the issue of communication is really important. There's no doubt about that we have to be able to interact properly with our residents and customers. And it's inevitable that on occasion that is going to break down. And the first point I'd say is eight complaints in a year around communication. In terms of the massive amount of interactions we have as an organisation is fairly small in the grand context. We have, every one of our officers, some are better than others, do have email facilities and are getting hundreds of emails every week and are dealing with those. So in the context of that, maybe eight poor communication complaints isn't too bad. And we do always have the contact centre for people to ring if they really do need to get hold of a person and speak to someone. So it's not, we've never kind of adopted that digital only approach. Yes, we like to encourage people to go digital if they can, because that ultimately is the most efficient way of dealing with their issues. But there is always that ability to speak to a person if they really need to do. And that's something I think we're always been committed to keeping those lines open. We have a significant team that handles those calls, and they're very good at getting those calls through to the right people. But yes, at some point, it's always going to break down, and it's great that we're picking those up through the complaints process and learning from those.
Alan comes in. Agreed, but we as councillors, local members, are doing the goalkeeping here. It's us who have to put up with the complaint, and we go and sort it on their behalf. Therefore, the complaints are minuscule, I agree with you, but only because we're doing the job on the ground, which is what we're paid to do anyway. So I do take your point.
Councillor White?
Thank you. And Councillor Francis has made my point for me, which is that frontline councillors are the ones on the front line who are dealing with an awful lot of this stuff. But if you go to Google and type in contact Staffordshire County Council, the Google search engine is optimised, so the first thing that comes up is the telephone number of Staffordshire County Council. I can show you right here. So it is. We do continue to make it easy for people to get in touch with us if they want. We've continued to fund the contact centre because we know people like to get in touch. Some people like to get in touch by phone. So I hope that, and as John Trable pointed out, put it slightly into perspective, 8 complaints in a year isn't really a huge amount in the grand scheme of things. We'd like it to be lower, we'd always like it to be lower, but we just need to get it, in a county of 880,000 people, into perspective that 8 complaints is not a whole hill of beans. And I've noticed that, John Francis, are you wearing that aftershave again? Because all the ladies are on that side.
Councillor Pert.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. Kate, what a fabulous job you do. I've said this before, I will say it again because I think it can't be said enough. You know, in every time that I've interacted with you, your speed is phenomenal. The responses we get are resident focused and you understand the issues really quickly, and there is significant care taken. So please take that as a resounding endorsement and feed that back. One assumes you have a team, but you may say it's just all you, and in which case then just reflect that back yourselves. I did want to, however, just pick up a couple of, one minor thing and then just a more substantive thing though. Minor thing is on page 15, there's just a really unfortunate comment, the first bullet, which says the reason for having the corporate complaints procedure is so that residents feel that they've been listened to. Actually, maybe the word is know that they've been listened to rather than feeling something, because that suggests that maybe they weren't listened to, and I'm sure that isn't the inference that you wanted from the report. Don't let me focus on one word, and don't let us lose the point that I first made that about the brilliance of you and your team. However, I was reflecting when I read this report, and it was a nice report because it summarises the issues and brings things really clearly into focus, so that's really helpful, and it looks backwards to allow us then to reflect forwards. So I thought that was all very good. I'm now on sort of page 26, and the reflection I had was, I wonder how often we walk the processes from a resident's point of view. Because actually what we're likely to see over the next maybe 2 years is residents having to walk processes and contact us in ways they never used to in the past because they didn't need to. And I wonder whether you know, all of our processes are as resident-centric as they could or should be. Not just in communication that was mentioned by Mr. Francis, but sort of more broadly. You know, if you went to Amazon, you know, their stuff is highly intuitive. I wonder how intuitive we are. And then that took me to page 23 and 22 and 23, which is the vacant seat scheme. Is 5 out of the 8 complaints, so a significant proportion, also one where it was found against us as well. And I wonder what the lessons learned were from the way that was brought in and managed.
For you, Kate.
Thank you, Councillor Pert. The vacant seat scheme was a decision that was made I think at this meeting or a meeting previously, where it was decided that we were going to move forward and not provide the vacant seat scheme. And we had a lot of feedback and complaints from a certain area of parents who were unhappy with that. In respect of how we dealt with it, it was a minor concern in respect of how we dealt with it, but we did take on board what the Ombudsman was said and reviewed our ways of working. The Ombudsman is a great advocate of asking us and supporting us to review our ways of working in order that they are fit for purpose, whether that be for ourselves or also third parties, as in our residents. So therefore, we did review our ways of working. We provided a way forward for the parents that were unhappy with what we were saying and what we were doing. And we offered them to come back and apply again. We looked at that information with our colleagues in the transport team, and the decision remained the same. But it was acknowledged that our ways of working weren't fit for purpose at that time.
Yeah, if I could. I'm just trying to... I wasn't worried about the decision. Well, I am worried about the decision. I was more worried about what would we do differently next time. Because clearly there was an area that caused concern to residents, and I don't know whether there would be a different review process or a different, what would we, I was more interested in what would we do differently, what did we learn?
Lessons learned are very important all the time in respect of complaints. Why go through a complaint and get to the end where you don't learn anything from it? In respect of this particular case, the process was reviewed with our transport colleagues. So therefore, what happened was that we didn't ensure that parents knew how to appeal. And it was a post-16 transport appeal. So therefore, we reviewed the post-16 transport policy with the service area, with Andrew Marsden and his colleagues as well. So the actual process was around the resident and the actual situation that they were in. Is that clearer? Thank you.
Councillor Spencer?
Chairman, thank you. I would agree with all the comments that have been made, Kate, about the way that you deal with these things in the reports. This report came to my committee originally, and I think you'll recall that we spent some considerable time over all the facts and figures. And the point about communication was raised on several times. I think the issue around communication is an important one, and it's one that we have to get right, although I'm not wishing to dismiss it. It is an issue that a lot of organisations are dealing with. Our own police force, of course, at the moment, is currently in special measures for precisely that issue. A couple of things that certainly came out of the report for me when it came to the committee was, if you look, just by way of an example on page 16, economy, infrastructure and skills, the majority of the complaints were around transport, as we've just been discussing, and that vacant seat scheme, but also highways maintenance, community infrastructure, all of those things that perhaps we as local councillors are already struggling with and trying to get right. And I do think that sometimes in frustration, and it's understandable frustration from members of the public, if they're not getting the answers quick enough that what they want, then I think the complaint process is a natural resort for them. And I do think that, we see some of those issues that we are currently trying to manage our way through reflected in the complaints system. Certainly what I heard at the meeting was hard-working individuals trying to recognise that and trying to put things right. I also thought, and I'm sure you probably won't agree, but I think you already hinted at the fact that the Ombudsman is very often, when I say on the side of, that's probably an unfortunate phrase, but they find, or you stand a greater chance of having a finding in your favour from the Ombudsman. And I thought there was some evidence that clearly demonstrated that people go through the process wanting to get to the Ombudsman because they know that that's where they are likely to get the best result. So I think you are also fighting against that battle of, whilst you are trying to find a solution, there is an ulterior motive to getting to the Ombudsman, which I think is sometimes reflected in this. Overall, I think my committee felt that people are working really hard and we are making a real difference to the people of Staffordshire. Complaints we should welcome, of course, because they focus our view on those areas that perhaps we're not getting right. But I was certainly convinced that we're doing the right things around trying to find practical solutions for people when they complain. Thank you, Chairman.
Anybody want to come back on that, or Councillor White?
I think Councillor Spencer makes a very important point, and sometimes the slight frustration is the local government ombudsman doesn't have to deal with the practical realities of balancing the finances of a large county council with very limited resources, against the legislation that's in place. And what we try to do is have a pragmatic response to people's problems, but we can't solve those problems in the way sometimes the local government ombudsman would expect. It would be nice, wouldn't it, if the local government ombudsman had a little bit more practical experience of trying to run a council, but that's not the world we live in, so we have to deal with those complaints as they arrive.
Okay, Councillor Spencer. Councillor Peter, sorry.
Thank you. And thank you, Kate, for your report. I wonder if I could just frame my question in the context of East Staffordshire, which is a very diverse community-based area. Do you get many complaints from people English isn't their first language, and do you find it particularly challenging and are able to adopt the same process when dealing with those sorts of inquiries?
In respect to the corporate world, no, but we do get a high number of complaints from residents where English isn't their first language in respect of children and family services. And of course, that's a statutory process. It's a different process than do it once, do it right. It's a 3-stage process. So, of course, that makes it a longer and more in-depth process. So therefore, what we tend to do is we tend to support the service area and go out and meet people and take a translator with us as much as we possibly can, to make sure that people understand the process and also support the service area so that they can have a thorough conversation in respect of outcomes, but to make sure they understand what's happened along the line. So we do attempt to do that, yes.
Do you get a sense of satisfaction then, having completed those episodes?
I love being out on the front line, so personally, yes, I do. I think it's important, if we go back to communication really, is that you take the time to communicate with the resident or a complainant, as the terminology I would use, to ensure that they understand what's happening, they understand what's needed, and the restorative practice at times that is needed within the service.
I mean, did you... Because you've always got a smile on your face, you're obviously very satisfied with the work you do. I just get a sense of satisfaction from the clients that you're engaging with.
I think that's very hard. It's usually based on outcomes. So therefore, if the outcome is a positive for the resident, you get, they are satisfied. If it isn't, you usually have they have a negative view of the process they've been through.
Kate, can I ask a question? I've got a bit of a background I need to explain. I used to look after a call centre myself in the drinks industry, taking calls in from pubs. And one of the biggest issues we had was the number of people available to answer the calls on a Monday. But people didn't used to complain about that because they'd wait and wait and wait on a Monday, and they wouldn't complain, they'd just be glad to get through. And so when we did, and I had responsibility for reporting of complaints, that never featured because they're always glad to get through, and that was it. And I feel the same way. Councillor Francis referred to the issue of the people on the street, people on the sharp end of dealing with the public. By far and away, my biggest postbag is to do with potholes, to do with Category 3 calls. And it's the same situation. When somebody's got a Category 3 call, they are extremely annoyed and extremely perturbed by how slow the process can be. So that after the 6 or whatever months wait and that Category 3 call is dealt with, they are so glad to have seen it dealt with that they don't raise a complaint. So my question to you is, how do you assess the right things to focus on? Because you've talked about improving on lessons learned. And I see on the chart the biggest complaint is about transport, but that's because there's a result that happens. Somebody gets a decision, they're not happy with the decision, whereas the majority of our service is ongoing.
Shall I have first go while Alan and Kate give it some thinking time? It's a difficult one. The complaints process can't sort out issues like the time it takes to sort out potholes. That's beyond the complaints process. Kate can't deal with that. I think what Kate has to deal with and the team have to deal with are we dealing with those issues around highways, potholes, whatever, in the proper way, in accordance with the proper process, bearing in mind how the council has set itself up to deal with those kind of issues. So I think we're getting beyond the kind of complaints process when we look at those kind of issues, really. I think what I would say in terms of those kind of issues is the communication needs to be really clear. If it is going to take months and months to fill your pothole, then the organisation needs to be very clear and upfront about that, so people know what they can expect. And I wonder whether we are as perhaps upfront as we need to be around some of those things around Category 3 potholes. I'm a regular reporter of potholes, as I'm sure everyone in the room probably is. And it is a little bit... by the time that the issues do get dealt with, you do think, well, I can't even remember whether I've reported that one or not. It is a bit like that at times. But I think the issue there is how we're set up in terms of dealing with those kind of highway defects. I think that's been through this organisation a number of times. We've kind of put the kind of issues to members in terms of the resources available, why they're categorised, why it takes so long to deal with those. And I think the organisation has had to accept, in terms of where we are, resources available, that's a sensible way of approaching it. It's very frustrating for everyone. It does upset residents. They do kind of feel disenchanted with the organisation when that's the case, but that's the reality of where we are in terms of the resources available to deal with our highways defects. Whether we need to be a bit more upfront about that and make it absolutely crystal clear to people that's how long they're going to wait, maybe we do, and perhaps our communication could be improved in that respect. But ultimately, we're not going to change that resident dissatisfaction except by investing, sums of money that we simply don't have into improving the service that we're talking about.
Did you want to come back, Councillor White? Well, I'll just come back and say I appreciate what you've said. You know, the service is not part of the reporting system for complaints. I just merely make the point that if we're not careful, we're looking at the wrong things. And that's the point, really. Whether there's another process that can identify what the things that really matter to our residents needs to be enveloped into one issues system rather than just looking at people that raise physical, definite complaints. Councillor White?
We do maintain close contact with our residents, though, through the COM survey, which I think is quarterly.
Not at the moment, it's not quarterly, but I think we do either 1 or 2 a year.
1 or 2 a year. I thought it was quarterly. So what we do is we go out and get feedback from random residents across the county and say, what are your views on the services provided? And that helps to steer us, hopefully, in the right direction.
Okay. There's one other question I'll raise, just in the nature that there's a reduction in stage 1 complaints and there's a growth in stage 2 and beyond. So that implies to me that people are getting more worked up, or perhaps there's more vexatious residents raising bigger issues. What's your comments on that phraseology?
I think obviously the report has identified that there's more stage 2s, and we've accepted those stage 2s in the process. So for me, the stage 1 isn't good enough. The stage 1 response isn't good enough. It's not addressed all the issues raised. When the complaint comes in, it's actually defined so the issues can be responded to. But obviously, from what we're seeing, they're not responding to it in an evidence-based fashion. So what we've started doing is we will review it before it goes out, send it back. So we'll say, well, what about this? What about that? What about the other? And also have offered training for the service areas to say, well, you haven't done this and don't forget that, etc., etc. So they know what the expectation is. So we have actually addressed that concern over the past few months. In respect of unreasonably persistent complainers, we do have a policy and we do implement it. when we get to a point where we cannot assist any further, I do a application to Mr. Tradewell here to see if he agrees with that, because obviously it can't really just be my decision based on, because that would be unfair. That would be unfair. So we ensure that that's escalated, and then we review that process ongoing.
Thank you. Councillor Francis?
Just a quick one, yeah. Over the years, I've said it many, many times, both in the council chamber and committees, that we need, especially new members that got on last year, we need training on some of this for the complaints procedures. Every member needs to know what the procedures are and how it's dealt with, so that if they get a complaint, they know who to come to. And I'll tell you, the officers have changed like the wind in the last 2 years to me, and I don't know who to go to anymore, except for you, obviously.
That's fine. We did some member training, but it was pre-COVID. Quite happy to do that again. That's no problem at all.
Okay, there's no other indication, so can I thank Kate for the presentation and also taking the questions. It's good to have the run-through. Okay. Item 5 is the Integrated Performance Report for Quarter 2. I think Councillor White's taking that in the absence of Councillor Parry.
Yeah, I was hoping that Kerry Dove would put in an appearance, because without Kerry we are lost. She's the brains behind the operation. I think she's outside. But no, I'm not the brains in the operation. Goodness gracious me. So we just wait for Kerry to join us, Mr. Chairman. That'd be great. Here we go. She's arrived.
Where have you been? We've just started item 5.
Right, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And this is the Quarter 2 Integrated Performance Report that we're presenting to you today. We have very much changed the emphasis on reviewing our performance each quarter. We spend a lot more time in Cabinet going through the performance of the organisation. It's vital that we get this right, and we're honest with ourselves about how we're getting on, because without that level of honesty, we can't improve and we can't change services for the residents to avoid the complaints that, for example, Councillor Francis was referring to. You've got the report in front of you, and I hope you can see that it's a very easy to read document these days. It's been reformatted, but there are some issues going on that we're all aware of, particularly inflationary pressure is coming through and bearing down on us very hard indeed. The demand for adult social care assessments and safeguarding remains very high. We continue to prioritise individuals of the highest need, and children's services continues to cause a great deal of pressure on us, with over 1,340, I think, at the moment, children in care. So that's again continuing to cause pressures. The cost of living crisis that we hear so much about, Staffordshire County Council is responding to that. And we've been able to help a large number of people, around 52,000 people, with £5.5 million worth of help over the summer through the Household Support Fund. We've opened a couple of new schools, Bramshall Meadow First School in New Toxteth and Fradley Park Primary School in Lichfield, so they're points of light in our previous quarter. As far as the revenue is concerned, if Councillor Parry were here, he'd tell you that we were about 10.908 or 1.9% overspent, but once we use some inflation reserve that we've been keeping back, that reduces the overspent to 3.643. 3.643 for quarter 1. We have financial challenges, like many authorities, but we are managing within our means. We continue to make sure the money is well managed and the services are as well delivered as we possibly can under the circumstances. So hopefully you'll be able to have some reassurance that we are on it and we are managing it in a good, consistent way. There's been some stuff going on in Westminster which you might say is less than consistent, but we continue to be consistent. Yes, that's my sentiment as well, John. Anyway, just moving on to the quarter two summary, which is on page 35. You've got the RAG ratings there, and you can see that we are reporting for children and families a red rating for finance, and we've got the details of that in the report, which we may well wish to interrogate. We are spending a lot of time working on children's services at the moment. The transformation has taken longer than anticipated. Some of the changes that have taken place within the children's services have caused some continuity issues, which we're trying to get to grips with. So that's the report in summary, Mr. Chairman. I've got Kerry, now she's arrived, will be able to answer any detailed questions as the author of the report, but I'm happy to answer any policy questions that you might have with myself and Mr. Tradewell.
Okay, questions start with Councillor Pert.
Thank you, Chair. It's your last point that I just wanted to pick up on, if I could, please. Paragraphs 17 and 18 on page 43. You can see on paragraph 18, in terms of the education, health and care plans, that performance is low and getting lower. And that's clearly a concern, because I think from memory there's a graph which indicates that effectively performance falls off a cliff following August 2021. And it concerns me for 12 months that we've been treading water and haven't made an appreciable impact, and actually the figures continue to go worse. So that's the first point. And I'd be grateful just for just sort of some comments around what is being done specifically and when will we see an improvement to that performance. But the other one, and it relates still to children's services, is paragraph 17. Looked after children is a huge issue for all of us. But the whole purpose of putting in, I seem to think, £8 million into transformation was to change these numbers and to change the model. And at the time that I remember seeing presentations on this, you know, this new model was lauded from the hills, and we're not seeing the benefits of that. And at some stage, someone's going to say, is it the wrong model? Has times changed and we need a different approach? Are we not implementing this properly? Or what are the issues that is not delivering us what we expected? And one of the questions I have in my mind is, do we need somebody external from what we're trying to do to give us a view as to whether we're on the right path, because we're investing a lot of money and not seeing the benefits? And this is one of the things that we keep throwing more and more into, and it does significantly concern me. And I would like some sort of level of assurance that actually it will turn round and be all right at the end of this transformation programme.
The departure of Helen Riley and the arrival of the Interim Director of Children's Services has enabled me to do a couple of things to address those points that you've just made. First of all, I've disaggregated the portfolio, which was a very, very broad portfolio, which included children and communities, amongst other things. So the interim director has only got children and is focusing on that. She's got a long track record in children's social work, and when she arrived, the first thing I asked her to do is take a full review of the performance of the transformation programme, because there were some promises made about the transformation programme, which you've just articulated. Those promises are taking a long time longer to deliver. It required a big shift of staff during the process of the COVID crisis. The consultation that took place was very, very tricky. Industrial relations suffered as a consequence of that as well. Some people were left the organisation who, you know, with the benefit of 2020 hindsight, we'd want them to stay in the organisation, and some people have been given roles which they're doubling up some of their duties as a consequence of that change. So there have been some problems in the process of delivering the transformation. We had a report to, an informal report to Cabinet by the Interim Director of Children's Services about 2 weeks ago, or was it a week ago? 2 weeks ago. we spent an hour going through the details of the children's transformation. And tomorrow we'll be doing further work on the children's transformation to start to address those challenges you've actually laid at our feet. I intend to get on top of the children's services issue because it's morally the right thing to do. It can't be the case that we should have this many children in care in this county. What we want to do is intervene. That was the model of the district model. Intervene early, keep children with their families, help families to stay together so that children didn't come into care. There are some issues that are exacerbating our circumstances. So, for example, getting cases through the courts is taking longer than expected. We've got a backlog of children that we need to be taking through the courts to get them moved on. So a whole range of things have caused this transformation program not to go as smoothly as we would have hoped. But the interim director has done a very thorough review of the transformation. There are things that we now need to do with the transformation program. There are problems that we need to address, and we will be addressing those. I can't say categorically, has it failed? No, I wouldn't say it's failed. Has it delivered everything it promised to deliver? Not yet. It may not, and we may need to have to make some changes. To the point about EHCPs, we have our caseworkers have higher caseloads than other caseworkers around the country, and I think that's probably not helping the situation. We do need to address the number of EHCPs, but there seems to have been a tidal wave of kids with special needs come from somewhere. It's gone from 3,000, I think, to around 7,000 in a very short period of time, and I'm not quite sure what the reasons are for that. I don't know if you've got a view, John.
I do think the system is set up to, from a parent's perspective, in that your child gets more and better if you have an EHCP, and I think that is driving. It is almost like becoming an EHCP factory, the whole SEND world now, which I don't think is the right answer to the issues. I think that there is an issue in terms of the timeliness of the EHCPs, and they are looking at that in the team. In the past, I think we have done work and brought in more people just to shift the plans through. But I think when the SEND re-inspection took place, I think that the view was that's not necessarily the right answer just to get them through quicker. Timeliness is one measure, but it's not the only measure of the SEND and the EHCP system. We need to make sure the plans are the right quality. I think that's something they're picking up as well in the team now, and making sure it's a strong focus of their work. There are other issues, I think, around keeping up with the pace of the EHCPs. So a lot of them depend on occupational therapists, and they're very hard to find. So I think that's something we need to think about. Do we need to think about more occupational therapists if we're going to be able to produce the plans of the right quality that we need? So there are some challenges there. But what I would say is when the SEND re-inspection took place, we had improved significantly from their previous report. I think previously they said about, in respect of 8 areas, we were deficient in terms of how we were approaching that. I think the latest report said we're deficient in only 2 areas in terms of the SEND service. So it is going in the right direction. There has been a change of leadership recently with new people brought in. I would say that area is definitely going in the right direction.
If I could come back, appreciate both those answers, thank you, and the detail that you've shared. And equally, I absolutely agree that that placing children in care is the least good option, and appreciate that direction of travel. I hear very clearly that it's work in progress. And I wonder when you might have a more detailed view in terms of what the way forward is, given that it's work in progress, and whether that will also bring some revised targets.
So the work in progress is the subject of the away day for Cabinet tomorrow, Children's Services. Since I took over as leader, my world of Children's Services has opened up. It's a huge and complicated beast as Children's Services, and there's a lot to go at. So we're going to spend a couple of hours tomorrow morning going through Children's Services at Cabinet Away Day. This will then feed into the MTFS process, which the chairman is on the MTFS working group. I think what you'll be able to divine from that, and the reason why I'm keen that it goes tomorrow is because otherwise we compress the MTFS down into December, is that we're able to set some revised targets and a revised programme for the children's services transformation. And you will see that coming through in the numbers, because we'll have to fund this. So we'll have to put it into the MTFS programme, and I would say by the time we're ready to go to full council with the budget in sort of January, February time, you'll be able to see that. But you'll be part of the process through corporate anyway.
This is Councillor Charlotte Atkins.
Yeah, thank you. I've just add on the EHCPs that I think that very often why parents go down that route is because they don't believe their school is willing to provide that additional help, either unwilling or unable, because of pressures, staffing and so on. And they feel that the EHCP is the only lifeboat they've got to recognition of the need of their particular child. And sometimes that can lead to having to move schools and even go into the private sector, which I think is unfortunate, to put it mildly. But I want to ask also about children. I see that there's an increasing number of children subject to a child protection plan, leading to the highest figure, I think, 725 in August this year. But I think what my concern is that nearly a fifth of those have been subject to a plan more than once. And it seems to me that that's likely to fuel movement into care. So I wondered what was happening with those child protection plans. Is that because of cost of living crisis? Is it because of greater pressures on families? Why is that happening? And more importantly, why are we finding that a fifth of those are subject to more than one child protection plan?
Councillor White.
I'm not able to answer the question about the details underneath the child protection plans, Councillor Atkins. I can get answers to that question for you in due course. In terms of the point that you made about the cost of living crisis, this is a relatively recent phenomenon, you'll recall, and this is a backward look. So this report will not include those aspects of the pressures that families are facing due to finances. So as we move forward, the next quarter report, if you start to see some numbers increasing, then we can start to say, is there a correlation or a causation going on with the cost of living? To the point about EHCPs and schools, we do fund quite a lot of work helping new parents with parenting skills. And I do think we would be remiss not to remind parents of their responsibilities as well in bringing up their children. We have seen a huge increase in EHCPs over the past couple of years. And my youngest son has just finished primary school and gone into secondary school. You do see, and this is in North Lichfield, it's the Willows Primary School, Colin, you'll be aware of. You do see children arriving at those schools who are absolutely not ready for school. And they're not ready for school, not because of something the school's done, because by definition they've not arrived at school yet, but the parenting skills have been somewhat remiss. So whilst we recognise our responsibilities as a county council to provide these EHCPs, we also ask parents to fulfil their responsibilities as parents. And I've known parents who, they've had their child and the first thing they've done, their baby, is just plonk them in front of a telly for 4 years, and then when they arrive at school and they're struggling to string sentences together or behave in a way that they're not properly socialised, they say, well, the teachers aren't doing anything about it. Well, the kids are only in the school for 35 hours a week. There is a responsibility of parents as well. So I think I would make that appeal to parents, as well as recognising that we do need to do more work around EHCPs. But to your point about child protection plans, I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't know the answer.
Okay, I'll just comment that I deal with a lot of head teachers in Warwickshire, and I know that they're talking about the fact that a number of children, because of COVID, have been self-taught at home, and they've suffered from that lapse as well. Next to speak then is Councillor Francis.
Thank you, Chairman. Where do you start with this lot? I've been involved with this way before I got on the Borough Council in 99 or the county in 2009. 30 plus years I've been involved with special educational needs and the circumstances behind it. I'm chair of Governors of Marshall Special School, which when in 2002 had 48 pupils, planned places were 55. In 2009 we went up to nearly 70. I moved the school in 2013 from the south end of town to the north end of town, increased the capacity to 90. We are now at 120 and climbing. We've got 18 parents waiting in the wings who want their children to come to Marston Special School. MD children have now been moved down to Tillington School, primary school that was. We've taken part of that building on. EHCP's care plans are an anathema. They've been a pain to this council and to schools for year after year after year because of the ed psychs, lack of ed psychs and knowledge within the county. We had serious issues a few years ago where the union stopped us doing the transformation plan for 2.5 years, and I've been heavily involved in the transformation plan, and used to meet with the director of and deputy director on a fortnightly basis to find out what was going on. I think, to be quite frank, we're in a catch-22 now. And I agree with everything that Jeremy Pert said, actually. We put £8.2 million into this. I haven't seen any specific outcomes. I don't know where we are with it. I don't know what transitions have happened and what transitions haven't happened that should have happened. I'd like to see what the plan is now and what the outcomes that we're expecting to achieve in the next 12 months to 2 years, because that's going to be crucial for us as an administration. So there's lots of questions behind this, and it's a massive subject. And Charlotte's quite right. The parents are going down the HCP route because they realise that it's something that they can hang on to, that the council have got to provide, that gives their child a better start in life, if you like, especially if they've got moderate learning difficulties, MLD children, which we've got at Marston's at the moment. It's a really involved and serious subject, and you could have a full day on a meeting on its own about this, and I've got that much detail in my head about this, but we are where we are. But I would like to know specifically what's happened, what's going to happen, and what the outcomes are going to be.
Mr. Chairman, if I could refer Councillor Francis back to my previous answer about the work we're doing tomorrow and the plan coming through with the MTFS, you'll be able to see that in the next couple of months, I think. I think back to the point about the number of EHCPs, I think we do need to ask ourselves as a society, as these, if we're experiencing such a fundamental shift in the nature of children coming into school from where it was when I was at school. When you were at school, people were using chalk and little, slate. But there has been a fundamental shift in the way children are presenting at school, and you've just really clearly illustrated it with Marshall's. You've got 2009 70, 2013 90, 2022 120. That's nearly a 100% increase in a 13-year span. And we've got to ask ourselves a question as a society, what's going on here? What we have to do is we have to deal with the consequences of whatever's gone on with provision of EHCPs and send places. But it is a conundrum, and it's a big challenge. But back to the point, we will be able to present in due course hopefully this side of Christmas, maybe shortly after Christmas, a plan. But, Mr Chairman, I think this is starting to feel like a subject for a separate scrutiny committee meeting, if that would be the way you'd see it going.
Just one point, Alan, that you need to know about, and that is that the instigation of putting special needs children into mainstream schools has failed nationally. It doesn't work unless you've got a school set up that can take them and deal with them, but specifically to have the Senkos in place to deal with these types of children. We haven't got, and I've said this year after year after year in this council, if you haven't got the Senkos there, the system will fail. We ain't got the Senkos there, the training, and now we've gone to academies, it's going to be worse.
Okay, I think as the leader said, we've had good discussion. That's probably a separate discussion topic. Councillor Worthington, you've indicated?
Yeah. I've just listened to what John said, and he's very right to a point. But I do think what Charlotte said before, I think parents aren't accepting that what they're told. They know that the child's got a problem because they're at home with the child more often than they're at school. And I'm pleased to report that the help that I gave to a family in Cheddleton was dealt with very, very well by this authority. And he's now going to a special school for dyslexia, and he's had the full support from Stafford County Council, so certainly some positive things that come out of it. But she was adamant that he got a serious issue, but they were going to send him to a normal mainstream school. But she was determined that he's going to go to a special school, and she was fully supported by Stafford County Council. So a big thank you from me, Alan. Thank you.
That's supposed to get one-to-one.
Did you want to respond?
Just grateful for Councillor Worthington's interjection there.
Okay.
Bright spot.
Councillor Pert.
Thank you, Chair. I think we heard Councillor Mr White offer to do a special scrutiny session. I would certainly welcome that on children's services and what that transformation looks like when the timing is right, because I think it's a critical issue for this council and for our residents, particularly if you can hit people, particularly if you can address things at an early age. So I appreciate that.
That's the whole point, isn't it?
Yeah. Can I just move the discussion away from children's services, if I may, just very briefly, please? I was just interested in terms of two things. On page 57, there's a very nice graph that indicates, amongst other things, category 3, which is the top bold line, defects. And fun enough, my figures that I get from highways didn't quite indicate the same figures on here, which surprised me slightly, because the figures I get from highways show that back in January 2021, there were 18.8 thousand defects which were outstanding and had been reported. and in September 2022, there's now 32,000. And they're growing at 1,000 a month, month in, month out. And that's because we're not, and that's because we're not addressing these as they're coming through. Now, I accept that they're all minor defects. But the problem is, at some stage, a minor defect will turn into a major defect. And the fact that they're growing, particularly during the summer, when you normally start seeing big chunks of defects coming off the list, is a bit of a concern. And I don't see any real plan to be able to address those defects. And it is concerning. I have stuff that goes on for 12 months or more. You know, gullies not working, flooding houses, all sorts of things like that. And if you've got this growing level of defects, it's only building up a problem for the future. I'll just leave that as a minor issue because category 3 is minor in relative terms. But moving on to page, just let me get this right, 41, paragraph 30. I am interested, because I liked the model of investing to save. I liked the model of investing £15 million into highways to remove some of these problems and to get on top of the long-standing backlog in highways maintenance, highways delivery. It's one of the things our residents see on a regular basis. and complain about on a regular basis. I wonder whether I wonder how the return on investment that was originally planned from that £15 million is coming to be delivered, and whether this is something that will be repeated in future years.
Would you like to respond, Councillor White?
So let's just remind ourselves that the total investment that we put into the highways is, I think, £67 million per year, and 48. I'm right, aren't I? Yeah, 67. The additional money, the additional £15.5 million was to sort of boost up the amount of work that we would do. I would have liked to have gone further, but the key thing to do in the first year was to see how the extra investment would be spent. Would it be spent effectively? Would it make a difference that people would notice? And if it did, then we could continue to do further investments. At the moment, we're still waiting for the results of that. One of the issues that we're facing with the highways budget is inevitably inflation. If Councillor Williams were here, he'd tell you all about the inflation in bitumen, in chippings and all that sort of stuff, which is actually eating away at the investment that we're putting into the highways. We have, as it refers to in paragraph 30, 8 new targeted structural maintenance schemes starting in September. So hopefully we'll start to see some results by next quarter, I would hope, and be able to report on that. I would like to continue putting additional money into the highways budget, but at the moment, as the MTFS working group will see, and as you've referred to in the previous section of this report, we have pressures all over the place with children's services budget, adult services budget. So we've got to ask ourselves the question, how do we keep a balanced budget for this authority? So at the moment, we can't make any commitments about what further investment we're going to do until we've gone through the MTFS process. But I remain committed to doing more on highways, because to be quite frank with you, Councillor Pert, I am the same as everybody else, sick and tired of potholes. I'd love to never hear about another pothole for as long as I live. But the fact of the matter is we have 6,400 kilometres of road in this county. It's a lot of road, and we don't have a lot of money, and we've only got limited resources to be able to address those problems. But I remain committed. We'll see what the results look like in due course, and we'll see what the funding for the council looks like when we get the settlement just before Christmas. But one of the challenges that we do face is that sometimes in central government we've got people living in a parallel universe. Paul Scully, who became Minister for Local Government in DLUC, had got 5 minutes worth of experience, and I know this is being recorded, and if it gets published, so what? 5 minutes worth of experience in a local authority in the south of the country in the 2000s, and comes straight out with, oh, there's a lot of fat to trim out of local authority budgets. What parallel universe is this person living in? There's nothing to go at. We're struggling to balance the books. So we've got attitudes like that in central government. No wonder we struggle to fund some of our priorities on behalf of our residents. That's a bit of a rant rather than an answer to a question, isn't it? But it's off my chest now, Mr. Chairman, and I feel a whole lot better for it.
Off your chest and on the record. Councillor Heath.
You've heard this record before and I apologise, but the words potholes could be avoided if we looked after the gullies and the drains. It's the gullies that don't get emptied properly. I've had 3 phone calls this weekend over gullies because we've had a lot of rain. The gullies, they come round, they take the top off, they don't clean them properly, and it's the water that creates the potholes. Go back to square one, it's chicken and egg. Get your water situation off the highways. And and just have a little moan as well while I've got people listening. There was a lorry tipped over on the A53 leaked to Buxton Road last Wednesday night. It had some animal fats on. The road has been blocked till this morning. I've had word this morning it's now free. But they put signs up in Leek to say the road is closed. The road isn't closed till you get onto the tops. So all the pubs, my phone has been alive. People turn round at Leek. They have to do that for the heavy goods to get an alternative route for the heavy goods. But the roads to Meerbrook, to Blackshmoor, to Upper Yoube, they're all accessible, and all the landlords and the Tisworth Reservoir, half-term, roadblocked. It's just, we need some better signage, but it seems to be impossible to put up, you know, the road's blocked for heavy goods, but you can access this road and that road and the other road. So it's a plea, really, and I think there will be some complaints coming in. I've been told there will. Okay.
We are addressing the gully situation. Your point has been made many times over many years as we've worked together, Councillor Heath. And so Councillor Williams has got a programme of getting those drains and gullies cleared, because it does lead directly to potholes, as you correctly identify. We do see a different attitude by farmers, though, to water runoff. There's a couple of farmers in my village who refuse to have grips dug in the side of the road. They'd rather the water stayed on the road. And the water's running off their fields onto the road and getting stuck on the road. So back at you, Councillor, because it's, well, you know, all's fair in love and war.
It's easy to blame the farmers. Farmers look after their own land and they look after it well, and they have to. But it's your job to get rid of the gullies properly.
I love an argument, Mike, I really do, and here we go. Right.
I'm bigger.
Okay, we've given a lot of food for thought there, including some of the things that we might want to put on the work programme for the future. Councillor Purr, did you wanted to try and get onto the rest of the agenda?
Were you going to move off this agenda item?
Yes, I was planning to.
I was just going to ask a question on debt on page 76. I noticed that there is an ambitious target to, well, there's a sensible target to reduce the amount of health and care client debt from 9 million to 9.8 million to 4.1, but I also note it's going in the wrong direction.
Client debt is a very difficult thing in adult social services, as well you know from your work as chairman of the committee. We're going to approach the requirement to pay for provision of domiciliary care and home care in a slightly different way, which is having the upfront conversation rather than leaving it, because that allows a debt to build up. It becomes big and scary. So just changing the approach will start to reduce some of that debt. The fact is that some of that debt has been hanging around for a very long time, as you know, and you sometimes you only recoup it after the person's passed away. So we are doing what we can to recover some of that debt, but we're having a different approach so that it won't continue to rise, if that makes any sense. We'll get on top of it.
Mr. Burt, happy with that? Okay, we'll go on to item 6, which is the interest charges. Something of an update. Who's going to take us through that?
Chairman, Councillor DeVille's poorly, so you've got me as the politician to take you through it. But Mr. Turner is here to help out, as is as Mr. Tradewell. So we'll be able to take you through the report together. Just by way of some background, for those who've been around for a while, you'll remember the Entrust contract came in 2013. It was a big contract, and it gave us a good chunk of money to help with the MTFS when we did it. But times move on, circumstances change, and so we have to change with those circumstances, and this report just highlights some of those changes that we're doing with Entrust. The background of the Entrust joint venture agreement is set out in the report in paragraph 1, which you can see before you, but just briefly going through it, where am I? Yeah. I've highlighted bits and I've gone and lost my highlights. Yes. Established in 2013 with Capita, and the purpose was to deliver a joint venture business creating sustainable and scalable organisation fit for purpose now and in the longer term, but those circumstances changed. If you remember that when we set up Entrust, we had most of our schools were maintained and we moved towards academy schools, so that's changed the circumstances. we wanted it to be a genuine collaboration, and we also were looking to entrust to expand its business operations, which hasn't worked out quite the way we intended at the time. The changes that we are proposing took place after a review, and the review comprised two parts: the governance of Entrust and the overall partnership of the Service Delivery Agreement, which is what SDA stands for, and this report concentrates on the SDA aspects. And then going through the report further down on page 88, and afterwards you can see the areas where we're intending to make some changes. So I'm just going to hand over now to Mr. Tradewell and Mr. Turner to add anything they wish to the report.
Yes, so the paper really concerns the mid-year point of the envisaged life of the Entrust arrangement. So we got into an arrangement for an anticipated 20 years when we did the deal in 2013. And this is sort of, we're coming up to the halfway point where there's a break clause in the service delivery agreement where we have that opportunity to decide what, if anything, we continue to want to procure via the Entrust contract. And there's been a very extensive period of negotiations, and I think the purpose of the report is to update you in terms of where we've come to as a result of that contract review. As the papers will tell you, initially when we started off, there was a contract between the Council and Entrust for about £24 million of services over a range of different service lines. So property has always been a big part of that, catering, cleaning, grounds, maintenance, but also a variety of educational related services, services for skills, a variety of others. Over that first 9 years of the contract, the actual value of the contract has reduced significantly. So at the point of the review, we go into that review spending about £10 million a year with Entrust, and rather than the original £24 million, and we then need to decide which of those services we're going to continue to use Entrust to deliver for us. That £10 million, by and large, the biggest chunk of that are the property-related services. In terms of its relationship with us, it ceased to be really a major education provider and has become much more of a sort of property FM type provider for us over time. And after an extensive consideration by the Cabinet and the various commissioners of the service, we've decided to make some further reductions in terms of the services that we will buy from Entrust over the next 10 years. I think we've also changed the nature of that relationship. So when we went into it, as Alan was explaining it, it was this idea of a partnership to grow a business, to deal with a different educational climate. Over time, I think our ambitions have become more realistic to see this as much more of a contractual relationship. So in terms of that next period of this relationship, it will be much more contractual. And at that review point, we've also built in additional controls to make sure that we only buy what we need for as long as we need it. So I think we'll be able to review each of the service lines after 3 years in the next 10 years rather than having to wait for a 10-year review. In terms of precisely what we're going to buy from Entrust over the next period, I'm going to hand over to Ian Turner. He's led the negotiations and he can explain what it is we're going to buy from Entrust and how much we're going to be spending on those services.
Most of it's been covered before. I just do like to make the point that in the conversations with Entrust, we refer to this as a tactical change and not a strategic change. So very much still, Entrust is the deliverer of choice for services to schools. The service delivery agreement, the SDA with the County Council, has always been a minority of work for Entrust in terms of their total turnover and continues to be. As was said before, and it's in the report, when the arrangement started, the County Council's service delivery agreement was 24 million. It's now around 10 million. Most of that change happened before and those reductions. So that change doesn't happen now. The big changes taken place. So our tactical changes that we're making at the moment, as John says, are about making the contractual arrangements fit for purpose. So at the start, it was all about this is the amount of money for the total services. And because of the nature, it had to be kind of set up almost on a budget transfer basis. That's here are the staff and here's what it costs when it was originally set up. What we're now doing is the costs for the services, and they're much more variable. So when a school maintains, it's very, very clear what the costs that transfer to the academy are. When the county council stops operating a building, it's very, very clear what those costs are, and they come out. So it's an easier arrangement to manage, and that benefits both us and Entrust. So that's a bit of background. So as I say, the tactical changes. So in terms of the services, the two bigger services that are coming in-house, that's early years and skills and employability. So early years fits much better with other activities that the council undertakes in supporting children and families. And obviously that's been a big part of the discussion earlier. And it's less school-facing. Skills and employability is about tracking and supporting children once they leave school. Where are they going on to next? Whether it's FE colleges, apprentices and that kind of thing, and fits a lot better with our other offers. So I say they're quite tactical changes. The other bits then are the contractual changes. So the two big areas, as John Tradewell has said, are around property, and then the other one is what we call education improvement, and that is a group of services that are funded by de-delegated schools grant. So schools funded is separate, but some of the money doesn't go to the schools independently, is pooled for kind of services that are better delivered as a group. So you can see those there: behaviour wellbeing, MIAS, Minority Ethnic Achievement Service, Curriculum Development Support and Governor Services. We've made an arrangement with Entrust that if Schools Forum decides not to de-delegate those, then that funding ceases, and the property services that continue then, as I say, change according to the number of properties we've got. It's the same with catering, cleaning and grounds. Major design is quite critical to us. You heard in the performance report that we opened 2 schools in the last quarter. Entrust support us with that massively and do a very good service on that. And then and obviously there's a significant amount of maintenance still for corporate property and for the maintained schools that we are still responsible for. The last bit that I'll just mention is back office services. So that can be a bit difficult to kind of get your head around, but the County Council in effect is a subcontractor, a supplier to Entrust for some schools that are services that are delivered to schools. So health and safety is the biggest one. We've got a really good health and safety team in the organisation, and they deliver those services very well to schools. There's a significant what's referred to as buyback, so schools can go wherever they like for these services, but the vast majority of them in the county use our health and safety services through Entrust. And then there are some minor ones, information governance and financial services. So the payment arrangements, I think we've discussed those. They are much more flexible. The contract management, I personally think work quite well. We have a 3-tier level of contract management. So the people in the county council who commission the services meet monthly, mostly with the delivery people from Entrust, and then there's an escalation process through that to a joint contracts group where we consider things in the round, and then up to the senior leadership team if things can't be resolved there. I've given you an example of the performance management regime. I could have given you 200 pages of specification and performance management regime. Those are available if you want to see them. I've just given you an example of those. So performance indicators every month reviewed, and we generally at the joint contracts group every month we review where those the summary of where those key performance indicators aren't being met. So that's my summary of it. Thank you.
Okay, there's no indications. I would just comment, having read the report, it's not the easiest of reports to read. I get the impression from what I've seen that page 95 is the key page 95 on the PDF. So as I understand it, it's been quoted as nearly 24 million. The 23,857 is the current cost of the contract. And we're looking at absorbing some of it in-house, some of it is going to continue with Entrust. I just think that perhaps a table explaining that would be better than what we've got. You know, having columns saying this is going to continue with Entrust, this is the cost of additional resource required for the council, and these are the sort of things that are no longer required. I find it a bit of a jumble, but if I've interpreted it correctly, we're talking about potentially going down from a 24 million contract to something like 9.9, is that right?
No, it's already down to 9.9 before we've got into this latest review. And from that 9.9, further services are going to come in-house. So, for example, the £1.4 million we spend on early years is coming in-house. The 173,000 on curriculum development is coming in-house. Governor services coming in-house, 34,000. 1.5 million for information, advice and guidance coming in-house. So from that £9.975 million, there are a few £1 million coming in-house, and we will end up with about £6 million per annum with Entrust as a result of the latest revision of these figures. So down from £24 million originally down to about £6 million after the latest contract changes.
Sorry, I misinterpreted that, but as I say, it wasn't very clear. Councillor Pert?
Thank you. No, I agree with you. I was trying to get to the figures as well. What was the residual left over? I think the report spends a lot of its time looking backwards, and from a scrutiny point of view, it's not very easy for us to invite you back in 12 months' time to say, actually, has it been a success? Have we saved cost? Is it benchmark value for money? And there is nothing there. Maybe it was deliberate that there isn't those things that allow us to say, yes, that's a tick in the box, or that's good. So that would be my sort of my secondary comment in terms of the report itself. It's very difficult to hold the executive to account on this element. But I did want to start in a different direction, in fairness. I just wanted to start by paying tribute to the staff, because actually I know a few of the people in Entrust, and they do a fantastic job. And it's very easy to get into the detail about a contract and forget about the people who are delivering the contract and doing a really good job throughout doing that. The two concerns I've got, which aren't really addressed in the papers, is clearly when we set out with Entrust on this journey, we all had the same ambitions, and those ambitions haven't come to pass, and that's really sad, because actually it could have been a massive divergence into bringing money into the county council, which would have been very helpful. And the bit which doesn't seem to have come off is the external market. And what I haven't understood is why no one else in the external market wants to buy in, because that would infer that the services aren't cost effective. And if they're not cost effective to the external market, they're not cost effective to the internal market. And so I've sort of failed to understand that element, because and this moves on. There are other players in the external market. I can think of Crown Commercial Services, but there must be billions of them, lots of them. And don't let me suggest one is the external market. But, you know, I would have thought being able to play the external market at times, not necessarily in times of great inflation or great change, but at times is quite helpful. And this seems to leave us on the same track rather than, you know, sort of saying, do you know what, the whole plan hasn't quite worked out. And I do think we need a forward view in terms of what the success criteria of the next 10 years are.
Thank you, Chairman. You're quite right to identify that. We have long been disappointed with the amount of business development effort selling their services elsewhere that hasn't taken place. That was the ambition originally when we set it up in 2013. To your point about performance management, we refer to the performance management components in paragraphs 28, 29 and 30. I think it would be appropriate to bring this back to this committee on an annual basis to monitor the performance of the contract so that you can have some reassurance that it's working the way we intended with these changes. And I think that would be a reasonable thing to do if you were minded to do so, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, another one to have for the work programme. Councillor Thompson.
Sorry, can I just ask one quick question? Have they been in-house before, these things that you're bringing back in, these areas? So we've had them in-house and then we've put them out to tender, as you'd say. Why? Because I don't know the history of the council, I just asked the question.
Yeah, so before 2013, everything that's in Entrust was in the county council. So at that time, we had about, I think, 4,500 people employed in the various services that we transferred to Entrust, and it turned over at that time somewhere in excess of £60 million. But there are a variety of reasons why we thought going down the Entrust route was a sensible route for the council. One of those was, if you looked at the history of the funding for those services, it had been declining year on year as the government reduced the amount of funding available for those services. So we were carrying a lot of risk in terms of 4,000 people in a business where the actual income was declining year on year. I think the other side of it was, I think it was becoming clearer and clearer that local authorities were being manoeuvred out of the education space and given a much more limited role in that space. And again, there was risk of holding very large amounts of services where there wasn't a huge future for local government in providing those services. And the nature of the schools sector was changing fundamentally. Instead of it being about however many, 40-odd local education authorities, it was becoming about tens of thousands of individual schools running their own businesses. It was becoming about academy trusts and chains coming in and taking over that business. So the view was taken on two bases. One, we were carrying an awful lot of risk by employing that sort of having these big services in-house. And secondly, there was an opportunity. If the nature of the education market was changing, if we brought in the right partner, could we create a business that could take advantage of what was happening in that market space and becoming the provider of choice to schools, academy trusts, etc. around the country. I think what we've been very successful at is the de-risking of the authority in terms of that massive service that we used to provide. What we haven't been successful at is that creating a business that has that ability to tap into that different education space and generate revenue for the authority. And that's why now we're getting to this review point. We're changing our thinking from being where we originally were very much focused on growing a business with our partner Capita. I think we're thinking now this is much more about a service delivery agreement, a contract, where we need to be absolutely clear that every penny we spend with in that contract, we get good value of money for the authority. And we're just, I think, doing a bit of adjusting now with the commissioners. Which of these services do we think we can do better in-house? Which of these services do we think Capita can provide, Entrust can provide a better service for us? And that's where we've come down on this list. About £6 million worth, we think Entrust still looks like the best provider of those services for us, largely in that sort of property FM area. I can't remember who mentioned it, but they have done some really good work for us. If you look at the 2 new schools we've just announced in the performance report that have been built, Entrust are the people that have been largely behind the building of those schools. They do some great work for us in that property field, but I think we feel that in terms of some of those other things like skills, we can better manage those in-house now rather than leaving it to an external provider.
Just to develop the point about what's changed, the world has changed significantly since we started outsourcing a lot of stuff between 2009 and 2013. So, for example, adult social services were almost entirely subcontracted out to an organisation called the Stafford and Stoke-on-Trent Partnership Trust, SSOTP. What we realised after 2013 is that some of the stuff it wasn't an efficient way of doing it. We could do stuff better in-house. And with the Entrust situation, when we set up Entrust, as Mr. Tradewell's referred to, nearly all the schools were maintained, and we would have a governor, a councillor governor, on most school board of governors. That's all changed, and with the academies running themselves and being able to choose where they get their services from, sometimes they choose to go elsewhere rather than using Entrust. So because the circumstances have changed, we have to change along with it. And again, in for example, adult social services, Nexus, which is the provider of last resort in a lot of cases, allows us to give the authority some security that if things go really badly wrong, we've got something that we can step in with. With the cases, particularly in adult social services, you find that providers tend to go bust on a Friday afternoon. So you've got 60 frail and elderly people in a care home, with a care home letting us know that they're about to go under, and we've got to provide loads of services over the weekend. So what it does is it not only provides us with some additional resource, but it also gives us some certainty that we're able to deliver ourselves. So we're just moving on because the world is changing, and that's the reason why we are where we are.
Okay, thanks for covering the report. We've noted the fact that we might want to discuss that in the work programme as well. Can we now move on to item 7, which is the Climate Change Annual Report for 2022 and also the Action Plan Revision 2. We're going to get a change of personnel at the table.
Mr. Chairman, please give my apologies. I've got another meeting to go to.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so we've got a 2-in-1. We've got the annual report for 2022 and also the action plan is referred to in our item 7. Is it Councillor Tagg?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. I'll do a brief introduction, then James Cartwright on my left is going to do a presentation. I've also got Clive Thompson on my right, another team that came to Scrutiny last year about this and obviously been working away on this report and the review of the action plan. And we're bringing it to the Scrutiny Committee today on its way to Cabinet in November. We're looking for, obviously, the Scrutiny Committee's comments, any amendments or recommendations they wish to put forward. I mean, the headline on this report is the 43% reduction in emissions since declaring the climate emergency in 2019. That's great, but of course, a lot of the low-hanging fruit have been taken out along the way. Some of the easy wins have been taken out, and that's through continued energy efficiency across the council's corporate estate. Schools actually leaving the council and going to academies, which has taken their carbon emissions with them. And also, we've done a lot of work getting to the bottom of where the council's carbon emissions are over the past 12 months. So we've been able to assess and obviously reduce along the way through things that are happening across the council in every department. And also, we've had the effects of the change of the way of working with COVID. Of course, whether that will be long-running or whether we will actually see carbon emissions increase as people begin to get more back to normal following the COVID changes, that remains to be seen. But there's still 2 high areas of emissions within the County Council, and that's the waste management area and also the home-to-school transport. And Cabinet Member Jonathan Price is working on the home-to-school transport and is aware that is a large part of our carbon emissions. And we've taken our waste management sites back in-house, and we're working very closely with the districts on waste issues to reduce carbon emissions there as part of the plan and the action plan going forward. There's been a lot of achievements during the past year that are detailed in the annual report on page 7 onwards, and I think we're building on a sound base as we go forward, and I think it puts us in a good place when we look at our action plan going forward. There's also a review in there for the Climate Change Action Fund, the Members Fund, which was 117 projects receiving 53,000 for climate change projects across the county for community groups, etc. There's also a section on how we measure our progress, which was asked for by this committee last year as part of the feedback. We've included that into the report this year. I think just also over the last year, we've taken, as a county council, a leadership role in the climate change agenda. That's through chairing the Staffordshire Sustainability Board, which involves all the district councils and borough councils working on a joint plan, a base pledge we've put together, so we can all move together towards those targets of reducing carbon emissions. For the county, it's 2050. For some of the districts, it's less. We've also taken part in the Staffordshire Expo up at Uttoxeter, which is many community groups and organisations across the county came together there to discuss climate change and how they, as businesses, as community groups, and as other sectors that are going to reduce their carbon emissions. We also held our own conference for community groups and the voluntary sector to help them to set on the path to reducing their carbon emissions, and also to make them aware of the Climate Change Action Fund which they can apply to. And also we're playing a full part in the emerging Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent Climate Commission, which will be a cross-sector organisation if it comes to fruition, which we'll be taking a leading role in that. As well as the annual review, you've got the review of the action plan going forward, 33 actions in our 5 key areas around carbon reduction, air quality improvements, natural environment improvements, waste and behavioural change, and the stuff is detailed within there, which we're planning to do over the next year. Last thing I will say is, 2 things I'll say, is that each portfolio holder on the council has a key role to play. They are all climate change cabinet members, and we have an accountability framework through our informal cabinet to ensure that each area of the council, through from SLT, right to senior management team, right down to cabinet members, are carrying out the plans that are in our action plan. And finally, on the last page of the action plan, you'll see the roadmap to net zero. And I think we've got a more realistic roadmap to net zero than we had last year. And you'll see that there is a reduction as we've got to now, and there are steps as we reduce further towards 2050. I think we're going to see that. We're going to see, spurts, and then we're going to see, as we're waiting probably for technology to catch up, as we head towards 2050, for able to eliminate as much carbon as possible and also to offset as much carbon as possible. Because as you can see on the graph, there is a point where we can't reduce our carbon emissions any further, but then that's where offsetting comes in through the tree planting programmes and the nature recovery, which the County Council is committed to. So I'll now pass over to James, who's got a brief presentation on more detail on the report. Thank you, Chair.
Morning, everybody. I've got a presentation which is on the display there. Apologies, you don't need to crane your neck probably until that slide 8. There's a few graphs which I'll talk through along the way. So firstly, I'd just like to go into the annual report and just highlight where we've come from in the past 3 years since declaring the climate emergency in 2019. You'll see on the left we've reduced from just over 50,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide emissions down to just a little over 29,000. The last figure there I just highlight is from 2020-21. We're always a few months behind just by the fact of calculating figures and our energy use. The next slide I've got there is just a breakdown of the emissions by operation. I think that Simon's already alluded to. Our largest areas of emission are our homeschool transport, our waste operations, and heating and lighting our buildings. Just to give you a flavour of the movers over the past 12 months, our home to school transport saw a little uplift. Mainly that was due to some of the COVID impacts, moving the children to and from school. Happy to say our waste management reduced, our heatings in schools reduced, our impact from our highways operations, including Amy, also reduced, and our emissions from fleet reduced as well. Some of those emissions within the fleet are our grey fleet, so those are the officers and managers moving around the county. I think with certainty the ways we work now in the past 2 years has had that change, and from the figures that I've seen of this current year's emissions, that has stuck, so we have reduced that going into the future. I think not taking a deep dive, but just to give you more of a flavour and to complement Simon's highlights. This, again, is the annual report and some of the good works that we've done in the 5 priority themes within the Climate Change Action Plan. Under carbon reduction, we've certainly improved our buildings, the insulation, the way we heat them, and also lighting upgrades. We've also had an EV trial where we've had a van where we've been driving around the county and done a few trials, and it's been very effective. So we're communicating that to all our service leads to try and encourage the take-up of EV and low-carbon solutions within our fleet. Within air quality, we continue with the Air Away campaign and anti-idling, trying to promote people around the county from not impacting on air quality where they can. In natural environment, we've certainly focused on trees and water. We've invested over £70,000 just outside Hamskell Ridware to prevent flooding of the village and reduce that impact to, again, a 1 in 100 year event, or potentially. We've also planted thousands of trees and tried to encourage that behaviour change and encouragement to communities and individuals by free tree giveaways, which we intend to replicate this year. Under waste, we've continued with successful comms campaigns such as Waste Savvy Staffs, composting campaigns, trying to alert the residents to try and reduce their impact, pull out some of that waste from our business streams, which will then have the positive impact in reducing our emissions and getting rid of their waste. Under behavioural change, which arguably is probably our biggest lever, we have continued with our comms campaigns, our Facebook, all our social media, and also I'd like to just flick onto the next slide, because I think it's worth celebrating that in September we had our first climate change conference. We engaged with community groups, parish councils, schools, promoting really the Climate Change Action Fund, the Members Fund, but also engaging with those communities and saying what they could do. It was very well received. We had over 70 delegates on a 4-hour conference, and that's a nice little comment from one of the delegates. We intend to repeat that this year and push that wider. If we can go on to the Climate Change Action Plan. This is due to go to Cabinet on the 16th of November. I think we've built on solid foundations from the past 2 years, and the outputs from this action plan are certainly more targeted. We've tried to be smart and deliver over the next 12 months. Again, we're following these 5 key themes, and as I said, there are smart targets. So under carbon reduction, we have things like we will install building management systems into 7 buildings to more effectively manage how we heat them. There's going to be active travel schemes that we're going to look at within some of our major towns. These are all time-bound. There's a Zero by Nature study on the natural environment, which I shall come on to later within my next slide. And also within waste, we're going to continue the push on comms. And under item 5, behavioural change, I don't know if anybody saw the carbon bubble we had in Stafford Town Centre earlier in the year. That was received really well, and the proposal to push that through all of the county in partnership with our districts and boroughs, promoting to not only staff but also businesses and residents what their impact is, how they can help us on that joint journey. I think hopefully that should also help the Sustainability Board and try to approach that 5.8 million tonnes of carbon emissions that Staffordshire County emits every year. So this is probably the slide which talks a lot. On the left-hand side, if I just walk you through it, the orange bars demonstrates our carbon emissions over the past 4 years. Happily to see that downward motion and that 43% reduction. Then the dotted blue line, which goes off towards the date, apologies if you can't see it, but it says 2050 on the far right-hand side of that graph. We've put in there where we think we will be over those years, and you'll see a drop past 2030 as more EVs come online and things like our home-to-school transport starts to decarbonise. And that's the downward trend that we think we will be on. You'll see also there's a grey line which comes up to meet that blue line. Now, net carbon zero doesn't mean carbon neutral, so we're not saying that we're going to get rid of all of our carbon emissions. But the carbon emissions that we can't get rid of, most of those sit within the waste operation. We're going to have to sequester or capture to achieve that net zero. Currently, there's only really 2 ways out of this. The first would be tree planting. Trees naturally sequester carbon and lock up that carbon into the future. The other option is to look at carbon capture and storage. Carbon capture is a technology which is well proven. We can do that now. Carbon storage is a lot more difficult, and there isn't a commercial model operating at any scale at the moment. But certainly there's a lot of research into that at the moment, and there may be opportunities around the corner. That figure, to give you a figure, is 10,000 tonnes. So we're looking at capturing 10,000 tonnes per annum of our emissions that we can't get rid of. That opens us up to questions. Hopefully I've gone into enough detail, but I'd welcome.
Thank you. Councillor Peart.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentations and the summaries. I think it's a really nice report, in as much as it's easily digestible, it's thorough, it's positive. I think that the action plan and the delivery plan, some of the delivery plans that we've achieved, I think is really clear and really straightforward, and is really a template that others would take some benefit from seeing and copying. I often see lots of words, not many actions, and I don't often see stuff with timelines to them either. And the timelines, and most of the timelines, are quite near term. Actually, I was quite concerned by the level of near-term timelines in terms of whether it was achievable. That's not a problem for this session, though, because we'll hold you to account next year on whether you've achieved those or not. But you're obviously starting with a track record. I did want to pick up a couple of points, though, not to dissuade from my positivity on the report itself. The first one was I wondered whether you could circulate the report to others within your network. It's obviously the first time I've seen the report, and I actually think it's a good template for others to encourage others to get on and do everything, do other things themselves, because it's very easy for people to be critical of councils generally, not just the county council, but councils generally, about what are you doing on climate change. But the reality is that the council is 2%. Of emissions, and actually we could do some brilliant stuff, which we are, but it does not make the difference that, you know, everyone putting in and chipping in together makes a difference. So I wondered whether you shouldn't be circulating this report to parish councils, to the voluntary sector, to MPs, to businesses, with a foreword which encourages them to join with us on the journey to net zero. That's the first point I wanted to make. Because I think if it was an average report, I'd say, okay, well, we'll just file it and hide it on the website somewhere. But I actually think you need to do a bit more with it. That's the first thing. Second thing is, in relation to page 112, which talks about the £2.2 million being spent on footpaths and cycleways. And I found it rather frustrating in reality that we can't maintain our roads with the potholes and with drainage issues. And yet we can find money to put into a greater long-term liability in terms of footpaths and cycleways. Now, if I was in a city, I would be saying exactly the opposite, because actually, you know, there are lots of connectivity opportunities for people on short journeys. So I wonder what the level of modal shift has been and the level of usage of these footpaths and cycleways, because anecdotally it's relatively low. And I wonder whether we should be chasing this nirvana as to whether it will come through and exist in the future. Because otherwise, if not, we're wasting a lot of public money on something that isn't going to give us the modal shift that we want. And then the third point is in relation to some of those big ideas. You know, there's some really good stuff in here, and particularly in relation to EV, particularly in relation to you know, carbon capture and some of those things. I wonder whether there are some other big ideas that we need to have 5 or 10 years out, that we will find an opportunity to fit into the plans as we develop Stafford Shire going into the future. And I think one of the ones, I'm not sure, it may be in there, is district heat networks. And, you know, what are the things that really would make a step change in difference? Because that's the other thing it's the only minor thing that I think it's probably missing.
Okay, would you like to respond to that, Councillor Tack?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Pert. Thank you for the positive comments also. And also I think you're quite right about, this is it's an ambitious document, but also it's realistic. I think when you look at that roadmap, we aren't saying there's going to be amazing things happening every year. It's a journey, isn't it, as we journey towards 2050. I think you're quite right about distributing this report. Of course, we're working very closely now with the district and boroughs, and as you know, in Stafford, with Jonathan working very closely on aligning our climate change ambitions across the county. I think that's right. You're quite right to say let's distribute it even further to our parish colleagues, to our business colleagues, and also to the health sector as well. We've got their ambitious targets now to reduce to net zero. Of course, the whole local family organisation across the county is 2%, and you're quite right, the other 98% we have levers and influences, and this document can be one of those, so certainly take that on board. I think on your cycle routes and the active travel routes, I think you're quite right. We are putting a lot of these in, and we have to measure that they're being used. And again, there is that maintenance liability, and something I've been talking to David Williams about, and the highways teams, they're quite clear of the fact that we're putting these in. They then need to be maintained if they're going to be used. Because I think have bits of wing mirror or something in the cycle lane, or a bit of a tree that's fallen down that never gets cleaned away. So I think working with district and borough colleagues, we need to ensure that these routes are kept open and available and usable. But I think in future, you're quite right, we need to bring a sort of a usage level on these to show that investment has been worth it, and also have in our plans for the maintenance of those as well. I think the last one on the big ideas, I think probably that's where Scrutiny can come in and help us. And I think you've got the report on the working group later, and then taking the working group forward. I think if the working group for me could look at some of those big ideas, do a little bit of a drill down on them and then report them back to Cabinet, we'd certainly take them on board, because I don't think the officers sitting here, myself or Cabinet, have all the answers. I think it's members working on a working group, which I think Samantha Thompson chairs now, would be really good feeding back to us, and we really look forward to that.
Councillor, did you want to come back?
Just wanted to comment. Thank you for that. I thought you had all the great big ideas. Sorry.
Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to compliment you on the Active Air team, because it's Ryan Proctor in our area, and I think him and his team are absolutely fantastic and have worked so hard with the local schools. I know he's leaving our area now, isn't he? He's moving on, and we're having a new lady in. But I just wanted to say thank you. He really has worked hard, and he's a pleasure to work with. So thank you.
Okay, Councillor Atkins.
Yeah, thank you for the report. What I wanted to find out is what tangible results have already been achieved by working with local district and borough councils. I see that you are talking about developing an EV charging infrastructure strategy in partnerships with district and boroughs. I would hope that the strategy would already be in place, and that we actually be at the point at the delivery phase, because it's been over 2 years now when district and borough councils and this council declared a climate emergency. And I would have hoped that EV charging, I'm no expert, but I would have hoped that there would be some sort of agreement already on what system was going to be used, and that we would actually be into the sort of delivery part of that process. So that's just an example, but what I'm really looking for is tangible results that have been already achieved by working with district and boroughs, and indeed parish and town councils, but district and boroughs in particular. So what has been achieved over the last couple of years working with them? I realise that the Sustainability Board has only been up and running relatively recently, but given that we do rely on district and boroughs to deliver for the county, I just wondered what had actually been achieved to date. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Atkins, for the comments and the question. I think on the electric charging points and the rollout of EV, we're getting some money from the Office of Electric Vehicle something or other emissions, which is a government office that's been set up to give us some money to local authorities, and we as the obviously the Highway Authority are getting that in 2023. We're out for a coordinator for that role. And we've also got the strategy, which is coming to Cabinet early in the new year, and is going to all the district cabinets as well, because they've in the formation of the strategy, and will be a cross-county strategy. So I think we're in strategy mode at the moment, which isn't always good for people to listen to, but there is a delivery plan around that to take forward. I think the issues with electric vehicle charging point rollouts is, of course, the issues with home charging and charging on the street. And I've got our highways teams and legal people looking into that at the moment, so that we can have a policy around that, so we can start to roll out. People with drives, that's fine, isn't it? But in terrace roads where we have a lot of on-street parking, that is the issue. And there's some evidence from in London where that's beginning to work now with on-street parking areas with bays, etc. But again, we're looking to see how we can integrate that into our plans here in Staffordshire. And I think the districts have their car parks, off-street car parks, which I know from Newcastle, where I'm from. Each of the car parks now has dedicated spaces for electric vehicle charging as well. And in our plans in Newcastle for a new car park, a new multi-storey car park, we're going to have a significant amount of EV charging points built into that as well. So I think it's coming online, and I think this money that we're getting and the coordinator post, which Clive's team is bringing in, will allow us to really sort of expand that and move that forward. But just for a bit of a reality check on this, there are 32,000 100,000 cars on the roads in the UK, and there's one fuel pump for every 250 vehicles. There are currently 4,500 EV vehicles on the road in Newcastle, in Staffordshire as a whole, and there's one charger per 18 vehicles. So at the moment, there is the capacity to charge for those vehicles which we have. But as we move towards 2030, we know that the change to EV will gather pace, and that's when the strategy will really kick in. I think other things really, you're looking for evidence of results with working with districts and boroughs. Just look across the county at the plans they put in place. Stafford, Newcastle, Staffordshire Moorlands with Joe Porter, working in collaboration and also sharing knowledge, which I think will show fruition in the future. We've all putting officers into an officer group that have brought together this base pledge, which we're all working on. And that is to reduce our energy costs, reduce our energy emissions. It's to communicate together, and we're launching this joint, as James indicated, this joint comms plan, which will be going to each of the district and county cabinets in the new year, where we're working together to get those messages out for behaviour change. And I think I've seen it in Newcastle working together with the ton of plastic which we highlighted in the town centre about recycling. James has talked about the Stafford, the carbon bubble, which will be rolled out across the county. So I think there are already signs that we're working together, and I think each of the districts can show, what emissions, reductions in emissions they've made over the last few years since all of us declared climate emergencies. And I think also we're all going to be involved in the if a climate commission for Staffordshire cross-sector comes together, all the districts are involved in working to make that come to pass, which I think will be a great innovation. Other areas such as Bristol, which have got a climate commission, or North Yorkshire, they've got a climate commission, have seen that cross-sector working together where businesses, the health sector and councils are all working to get to that target which we want. So I think a lot going on and a lot more will happen. I think next year we'll see even more in our annual review to show the working between the borough and districts and county. Thank you.
So what you're basically saying is it's still a work in progress, and that, actually in terms of tangible results, I'm pleased that, you've got some EV charging points in council car parks in Newcastle. Clearly, Staffordshire Moorlands needs to learn from that. I think there's only one in Leek, and that's been provided by Morrison's supermarket, which is good. And of course, where you have a lot of terrace streets, that is a problem. And we certainly have plenty of those in Leek and in the Moorlands, so it is one of those issues. But I just think that it is, when I've raised things like air quality, I just fear that sometimes I get a sort of response, well, it's all down to highways and that's the county council's responsibility. And I fear that the joint working is not as effective as I would like it to be, on the ground. Because when you're talking about, traffic flow and the impact it has on air quality, then it's, that's a county issue. And I would hope that, I won't get that response in the future. I will get, yes, we're working on that together, rather than, actually it's only the county can sort that out. Because I think, unless we all take our responsibility seriously, whether it be as council officers, councillors, or members of the public, that we're not actually going to crack this problem.
Okay. Can I mention a few things that I'd seen going through it? Firstly, glass half full, if I can congratulate on the orange charts and the fact that there has been that improvement for the last 2 or 3 years. There's a typo that I think is worth correcting. It's on page 115 where you've referred to the wider counties performance. Counties should be county apostrophe S rather than counties plural. It refers to 5.8 million tonnes. I think you could do more to explain what the wider counties is. I presume you mean the county family, including districts and boroughs, and maybe that can be identified. And I'm going to slightly disagree with what's been said already in terms of the page 143, which I think is the critical thing, which is you're describing as the roadmap. I've made this point before. It's all very well putting a chart together and saying we're going to reach such and such by 2050. I remember being on the district council cabinet when we talked about 2025 zero to landfill, and it was a big mantra that everybody's quoting some 10, 15 years ago, and we're not going to do it in the next 2 years. So picking a year and saying we're going to do this by this year doesn't actually necessarily get you there. You've got to have some actual plans in place. And Councillor Tagg, you referred to something which I'll pick up on, which is that it'll happen in spurts and technology will catch up. Well, by far and away the biggest thing that will happen that will make a difference is something else you've referred to, which is charge points. So once there are sufficient charge points, the world will, or the country will move over to electric vehicles because it'll be a lot easier to charge up. And that's the thing that's most stopping people from buying electric cars or electric vehicles for businesses. It's the absence of charge points. So in terms of big ideas, that's the salient main thrust of what needs to happen. So on all the work with the districts and boroughs and parish councils, wherever it might be, getting those charge points is the be-all and end-all as far as I'm concerned. Once they're in, the spurts will happen. But I'm a bit dubious about drawing a chart, which you could draw with a bit of a ruler, saying, well, this is where we are in 2035, this is where we'll be in 2040, etc., etc. You know, you've got to have where the spurts are going to occur to make that difference. So rather than congratulating the chart appearing to achieve its objective in 2050, what I'd like to see is what the discussion is going to take place with the boroughs and districts in terms of number of charge points, the 18:1 ratio. When is that going to be improved? When are we going to convert all the fleet that the council owns to electric vehicles? You've referred to £7 million, I think, somewhere in the document as being the spend on travel schemes. How much of that is going to get converted to actual assets that will make a difference, i.e. electric vehicles and charge points, as opposed to, and I'm not down crying it, but you referred to, James, the behavioural change. Again, I'll pick up on something that was mentioned in one of the slides, the knowledge and passion. I think there are a lot of people in this room with knowledge and passion, and when you speak to people who've got knowledge and passion, but everybody's waiting for something else to happen. And these spurts, as you've described them, need to be led by the council. So that would be my comment on the presentation of the detail. You know, what significant changes are going to happen, which will give us confidence that roadmap is actually going to happen.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll bring James in a second for more detail, but I think thank you first of all for putting right some of the errors in the document grammar-wise. We'll certainly take note of those down and we'll move them forward. I think what I mean by the spurts and the growth and is the technologies that are going to come along. We talk about EV. Well, we should also talk about hydrogen, shouldn't we? Because I think that's a way forward for vehicles in the future, and that technology isn't there yet. We're all waiting for it to come, and when it comes, I think that may be a game changer. I think we've had a lot of discussion, just as you've just articulated there, Chair, about the roadmap and the chart, and there's no good, there's no ideal way to do this, but we've got to try and, as I think the committee asked last year, begin to put down how we're going to achieve this. And I think this is the latest iteration of it, and I think we'll be working to bring next year an even better way. And perhaps the working group could have a look at how our reporting back on this roadmap can be enhanced. As you say, Chair, the big brain we've got on the county council of everybody can help us to get to where we want to go. But on the detail on you just asked, which referred to James' presentation, I'll hand over to James for an answer.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just flip back. I mean, the blue line that's dotted along there, I mean, we've done some significant amount of work in that, and some of that is made up of transport, where EV will clearly make a huge difference. Some of the transport are large vehicles, so EV won't work by just the technology is not there. If you put a battery into a heavy goods vehicle, it's preclusive because of the weight of the battery. So there's technologies like hydrogen that need to be developed, green hydrogen at that, because it needs to come from a renewable source. So that's why it's been pushed a little bit further down the line. So certainly if the Climate Change Working Group could put some work into that, some suggestions on how we could develop a plan on a page or a graph on a page and articulate that would be welcome. I think also some of the technologies that aren't quite there yet, such as air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps, the technology is there, but it's probably preclusively expensive at the moment. The drop post-2030, some of that is our corporate buildings, and if we do have any maintained schools left in our portfolio, as the technology price comes down and becomes more affordable, that's where that drop comes, and certainly we'll capitalise on that once that balance point, that tipping point is reached. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Well, thank you for it, and I think there's been some generally positive comments about it, and we'll look forward to another chance to review it. And thank you for your attendance. And obviously we're moving on to the... You're welcome to stop for the next item, which are obviously very pertinent, which is our own working group update. Councillor Thompson, you want to lead off on that, or...? No? Okay.
I want to learn how to lead.
Okay. Well, I'll give you a bit of the background on it. Obviously, we've had a working group created to look at the internal contribution of the county. That working group was formed under the chairmanship of Conor Warman, who's no longer involved. He's no longer a member of the corporate review. And we passed that responsibility to Councillor Thompson. I think there are one or two other members of this group who are also members of that working group. And what's been circulated is a précis of where we are in terms of how that working group might develop or go forward. There have been some comments about whether it should be focused on some of the big ideas, what we've just talked about, whether it should be looking externally or should it be focusing internally. And I know various members of that working group have had their opinions about whether it's focused correctly. And also, there's an issue about this meeting is broadcast in public. The working group is not, and there are some people of an opinion that perhaps a public exposure of what we're doing towards improving the performance of the county on its sequestration and carbon reduction might be to our advantage to have that opportunity. Really, the point of the update is to give some steer from this parent committee on how it wants that working group to continue. So I'll give it over to members to make any comments. Yes, Billy. Councillor Peters.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll just make one comment regarding the broadcast that you mentioned, broadcasting it. The big challenge on this total project is engagement, getting the message across, influencing behaviours. And I think the more we can take the benefit of broadcasting whatever professional advice and the views of, I think we described ourselves perhaps as knowledgeable, but it's important that we get the message out there. And I think adopting the broadcasting of information is a good idea, and I'd like to pursue that with some vigour, if we may.
Okay, Councillor Pert.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd welcome Councillor Peters' comments. I think it's a sensible approach. We all have a role to persuade everyone to do their bit in climate change, and not just try and pass on responsibility generically to bodies like the County Council. I reflect also on the figure that 2% of emissions is delivered through the public sector. So if we don't engage more widely, then we've got a problem. But equally, if that group only focuses internally, frankly, we miss some of the opportunities are there, the step change opportunities that I discussed in the last session. So I think that we should be externally focused, accepting that we don't have responsibility for all those levers. I probably said exactly the opposite at the working group, though.
Okay, well, referring to the internal and external focus, I will just point out that and I didn't go to the meeting, but I've had the report and I've understood it as I see it, that there is a possible conflict or duplication with the role of the Sustainability Board. And we need to, as a parent of the working group, decide how that overlap or duplication might be eliminated. So you mentioned the word internal, external, or the difference between those. You know, I raised the point of public debate as opposed to private debate. I'm just wondering what the remit of the working group might be as opposed to the Sustainability Board. I know that that board, I won't say their name again because I can't say it, that board deals predominantly with the districts and boroughs and therefore is a wider spectrum. Perhaps the working group should be more internally focused. Councillor Pert.
Maybe you could challenge the working group to look at the scope of activity of the Sustainability Board and then decide where the clear blue water is, because there is no point in duplicating a recognised county-wide board, but at the same stage, I'm not sure I have the detail in front of me to be able to make any real positive assessment on the point you've just made.
Okay, I like the idea of providing something of a challenge of what the S board is doing. The other comment that I've had raised is what happens in terms of generating the big ideas. If you bear in mind that the two bodies might invite somebody who is an external expert, you know, where is the best input to our discussions best seen? Should it be the Sustainability Board that's inviting experts in, or should it be the working group? Any members have any views on those? Councillor Thompson?
Can't we go to the meeting if the sustainability, I can't say that word either, group has them at theirs? Cannot one of us be nominated to visit that group when those persons are there and report back?
Yeah, I waited for other comments, but I certainly feel that the Sustainability Board should be looking at external experts and getting the wider spectrum of input, and it's obviously got more clout to do that because it can speak on behalf of what is effectively 10 authorities, and so therefore has more pulling power, whereas ourselves with the working group, we're not going to be able to attract the big hitters to that sort of environment. But yes, we should be participating, and those of us that are on that working group should be interested to hear what the experts have got to say at the main board meeting. So I think we're sort of coming towards the fact that we should be an internal challenge and an internal champion of things and feed those ideas up maybe to the Sustainability Board. And I think that separation of duties would be quite useful. I certainly think that, and I go back to what I was saying earlier, the measuring stick, I think, is something we can improve on. And what I would like to think that the internal working board can do is actually look at some of the facets of potential, I'm going to use the word spurts again, the things that might change that would make a difference, and how much difference would that make, and what should we be doing to achieve those. As I say, if we're putting 7 million into travel as an authority, as a county council, where should that 7 million be spent? Should we be giving some guidance in terms of our own internal views about how that can be better allocated? So I haven't heard any contrary views. I think what we'll conclude then is that the working group should continue. It should be somewhat internally focused in measuring performance, certainly challenging what it hears from the Sustainability Board, and certainly attending and participating where possible, given that it's obviously a board for districts and boroughs to correspond and work with the county. Is that agreeable, Councillor Pleasers?
Forgive me if I should know this, but is there a formal mechanism for the for accessing Sustainability Board decisions? How will we get the input from the Sustainability Board into the climate change group? Is that something that Samantha attends or has access to?
Certainly no problem with getting the minutes fed into the board. I think, as Councillor Pert said, you know, each working group meeting can have the previous minutes of whatever the board has agreed, and then decide what it wants to challenge, for want of a better expression. So yes, that's not a problem feeding it into the group. Councillor Tagg, did you want to speak?
Thank you, Chair. I think your analysis of how the working group should work, the Council's internal one, I think is right. Just as an explanation on the Sustainability Board, it sits as a subcommittee really of the Leaders Board. It doesn't actually make any decisions itself. What it does is refers, you know, it's analysis of, for example, should we have an EV strategy? Should it be a county-wide district and borough one? Yes, it should. It then goes back to the relevant authority to put that together, which was the County Council in this case. We've got East staffs leading on planning policy at the Leaders Board. So the Sustainability Board wants there to be net zero policies in every local plan. That has then been fed up to the Leaders Board for that to be implemented, and so on. The Joint Comms strategy will go to each cabinet to be ratified. We've had it at the Sustainability Board. We think it's good. We think it's a way forward. We think it's that, as Councillor Pert said, getting that message out there and behavioural change. That now needs to be enacted by somebody else, which is the cabinets, obviously. So I think just to be that background for the Sustainability Board, and I think there isn't any friction between a working group and the Sustainability Board. I think they complement each other, and particularly, as you said, Chair, internally, you know, I'm looking for that scrutiny and also looking for those ideas to come that I can feed into our plan, which we also then feed into the Sustainability Board, and then ultimately up to a Climate Commission, if that becomes for Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire, which will be the bigger voice for all the sectors.
Well, Mandy's obviously got the minutes of this meeting, and I think what we need to do for those people participating in the working group is make them aware of what those different remits are. I think that clarity will help, because you know, I think then people realise how the two organisations or the two bodies fit into each other. Okay, we'll conclude that as the end of item 8. Thank you for your attendance, the three gentlemen. And we'll go on to item 9, which is the work programme. There were a couple of things that we mentioned earlier, which we might want to consider. The one alteration to the work programme from the last time that you've seen it is the boundaries report is added into that. But what we've also discussed today is possibly looking at the children in care safeguarding monitoring of numbers, and secondly what we've just discussed, the Entrust one we want to have an annual review of as well. Councillor Pert.
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely support reviewing in greater detail the children's services. You know, it's a fundamental part of the County Council's remit and responsibilities. It's under-delivered and underperformed, and these are really critical, vulnerable young people within our system. So absolutely would recommend that. On reflection in terms of the end trust, however, if the contract value now has gone down from £10 million down to £6 million, you know, frankly, even if we did an amazing sterling job of finding something or doing something, frankly, it's lost in the roundings.
Okay, that's a fair comment. I mean, I do think that we'd possibly get a better steer on where things are going by having one more review, because we both made the comments about the clarity of the presentation. Councillor Peters?
Yes, just building on what Councillor Pert said, I think Mr White shared with us the numbers were sitting at about 130-something children in care this morning. We hear about the financial position, as Mr Pert just explained. That number continues to increase. We're going to get into some troubled waters, I think. Despite the assurances from Mr White that he's going to get a grip of it and get it sorted, I think there's something for us to do to keep a grip of it, as it were. So I'd like to see that pursued.
Okay, any other alterations or additions for the work programme? No, thank you. I'll conclude the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.